Ready to go fishing?
Yeah, and do some advanced casting techniques, some skipping, some pitching, and show you guys how important casting is when you're trying to catch bass. It's hobby is fishing. This weather sucks, but we're gonna teach you how to cast, especially from the bank. Today you're gonna learn the specific casting techniques that you can use to catch more bass throughout the year. When it comes to fishing from the bank, most of the fish are actually right at your feet and you don't even know it. That's something that I learned in Korea. Sure, we can just take a rod and cast it into the middle of the lake all day, but the fish, either if they're there, they're used to seeing that all the time, or they're actually not even there. So today I want to teach you guys how to underhand cast, how to roll cast, how to side cast, and then also, most importantly, how to skip a bait. Before we get into the casting techniques, I'm going to be starting with a spinning reel. That's because when you're learning these casting techniques, it's actually easier to learn the motions on a spinning reel where you're not going to backlash a whole bunch. Or I know also a lot of you guys just fish on a spinning reel. And when it comes to a baitcaster versus a spinning reel, the biggest downside that a lot of people say is that you can't thumb a spinning reel like you can with a baitcaster. You can't control where your bait lands by slowing down how much line is coming off your spool. However, you can kind of control where your bait lands on the spinning reel by thumbing your whole spool. So it won't be like a baitcaster. Essentially what you're going to be doing is when you cast out your bait, you're going to take either your finger if it reaches or your other hand to slow down the amount of line coming off. So that's going to look something like this. So I'm going to cast out, and when I get that bait, I'm going to put my hand and slowly slow down that line. And that's something that can help. Like, let's say you overshoot a cast and your bait's about to hit some trees, then you can hold your line and stop it in place. Now let's do an underhand roll cast. So the whole point of the underhand roll cast is really important, especially when you're bank angling, is that, a lot of times we have trees overhanging us. So we can't really always make an overhand cast. Sometimes we're gonna have to cast underhand. And this kind of also becomes the first step of learning to cast, to learning to skip your bait, right? So what you're gonna do is let out maybe like a foot of line like that, right? And just enough so that when you spin your rod tip, that your bait spins like that. Now, you're going to, the big goal here is that you want this bait to be as close to the water the whole time it's flying, and then it'll land. And especially when we're fishing from the bank, a lot of people forget that the splash of your bait can scare fish off. So we want to be very stealthy with our cast. So when we make this cast, we're gonna open our bill, have our line out, gonna roll, and then keep it down. Let's do that again. So open our bail, you're gonna roll your rod back and cast it as close to the water as possible. And the second really important technique when you're fishing from the bank is actually a roll shoot. I don't know what else it's called. That's what I learned it as in Korea. But especially here, like let's say I'm on the bank, there's a bunch of brush over me, so I can't really stand. I'm gonna have to crouch. And if I lift my rod like this much, I'm gonna get caught in the trees. So what this roll shoot cast is, it's kind of like the underhand roll cast where you're making a circle and sending it out. But you can do it you can do it without moving your rod tip at all. So here's how that looks. So here's how you do the roll shoot, right? So with your rod facing straight in front of you, you're gonna let out a good amount of line, like 2 to 3 feet. However much line you have so that you can do this. So you wanna start by practicing this motion, by spinning this bait in front of you in a circle. And then what this becomes is, once you've built up enough speed of this bait spinning, once the bait hits the bottom of the circle and starts going forward is when you want to let go of your finger. So you're going to spin it and then shoot it out. And as you can see, it becomes a cast that you can do with very little space. All right, now let's get to what you're really here for. Let's teach you how to skip a bait. So when it comes to skipping a bait, we have to go back to the underhand roll cast, right? And if you practice your underhand roll cast, you'll kind of notice that you're actually kind of skipping your baits already. So when it comes to skipping a bait, we got to go back to that underhand roll cast. And if you're practicing your underhand roll cast, you'll kind of notice that you kind of end up skipping your bait anyways. So when you're just starting to practice, what I recommend is starting on a spinning reel, because you can't backlash a spinning reel and you can learn the motion of skipping a bait. But also, I like practicing with a wacky rigged Senko. This 5-inch Senko has enough weight to really carry this bait and help your casting. And when you start skip casting, you want to have maybe just like 3 inches of line out, not too much. You don't want your hook touching the first eye on your rod, but you want to have about 3 inches. And it's really like skipping a stone. The motion is very similar to skipping a stone. When we skip a stone, we don't throw our stone into the water. We want it to glide on top, right? So it's the same thing. You're gonna have 3 inches of line out from your side, and then you're gonna wanna glide this bait. So even during your cast, don't start your cast up here. Start it down close to the water, and then bring it across the top, like that. The thing with skipping a bait is that your first skip when you skip a bait shouldn't be right at your feet. So you shouldn't be skipping like that. That's how you blow up. You actually want to aim for about, like if I put my rod on the ground in front of me, I want about 1.5 rods length from me and from the first point that bait touches the water. So again, when I go to skip, we're going to bring that rod right close to the water, skim it right on top, and have it skipping, pretty much have that first skipping point far out from us. A lot of people, when they first start skipping a bait, their biggest thing that they do wrong is they cast straight into the water. They try to skip right in front of their feet like this. And what that does is that, sure, it bounces, but it's not going to get the distance. So it's important to get that bait to have its first skipping point 1 rod or 2 rod length away from you, in front of you, where you want to skip. But also, the motion is not, you're not sweeping your rod across. It's not a golf swing or a baseball bat swing. You actually want to think of it as pushing your rod forward like this. You want to keep it the same. You don't want to turn the tip of your rod away from you. You want to have it pushing forward. So think of it as more of a push than a cast, where you don't want your rod tip going all the way to the right. You want to keep it going forward like that. And that's going to help a lot. Now, when we get to a baitcaster, if you practice most of the casting motions with your spinning rod, now you just apply the same motions, but instead of thumbing your spool by putting your hand over the spool, we're actually using our thumb on our reel. However, with a baitcaster, and the reason why I prefer fishing a baitcaster from the shore is actually the ability to do a pitch cast. Now, what that is you're going to drop your rod tip. You're going to give yourself enough line that you could put that bait into your pocket if you wanted to. You're going to point your rod tip down, and just by lifting your rod, it's how you get the bait to be cast out there. So again, you're going to pull your line out. You're going to release your spool, pull your line out so that you can put your bait in your pocket, point your rod tip down towards the water, and then just by raising it, you're going to get that bait to go out there. What this allows you to do is, if you see from the side, I can cast that bait out really close to the water. I can have that thing right on top of the water, just like that. And I can make a really quiet entrance. And when we're fishing from the bank, what's really important, and what a lot of people forget, is that the splashing sound of your bait hitting the water can scare fish off. So what I do recommend is actually, with a Senko and a EWG hook, practice that at home a lot, like this. Now, what I do in the winter, or when I had nothing to do and I couldn't go fishing, I would sit in the hallway of my house and practice my pitch cast. I'll take my rod with a bait and just practice casting as close as I can, like into a cup. I would put a mug down in the end of the hallway and just cast right up into it. And when you're practicing this at home, you want to make sure that your casts are very close to the ground and right up to the camera. Now let's do some skipping. So again, if you practice with your spinning rod with a baitcaster, it'll be very similar. You're going to give yourself about 3 inches of line to start. Put your brakes up first. Get your brakes all the way up when you're just starting so you don't blow up your spool. You're going to open your bail. And then again, even more so now than with a spinning reel, is it important that this cast doesn't go to the right? You want to be pushing your rod. You want it to be a straight moving. The action of your rod, you want it to be going parallel. How do I explain this? You don't want this rod you don't want the point at which your rod tip goes from like 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. You want to keep this thing straight through the whole cast. So give yourself 3 inches of line. Again, 1 to 2 rod lengths is where you want to be aiming to have that bait hit the water for the first time. Keep it close and then skip it. Again, 3 inches of line, about 1 or 2 rod lengths in front of me, and get that thing casting. And again, always make sure, like I said, you don't want your cast to go to the right. You want to be pushing that bait forward. You're not casting. When you're skip casting, you're not casting. You're skip pushing that bait. 3 inches of line, push that thing. Let's talk about real life use cases and why skip casting is important. So on this pond, I've got some overhanging brush right over there. Now this would be really great for some bass, right? I can't overcast cast into it because I'm gonna get hit. I'm gonna get caught up in the trees. What I need to do is skip cast. So we're gonna push that bait into it. And also, when you're skip casting, you want to remember that you want to actually. So you're gonna push your rod through, and at the ending point of where your rod is pointing at the end is where your bait's gonna go. This is why we skip cast. So you can get it under these overhanging trees, which you wouldn't be able to do with an overhand cast or even a sidearm cast or an underroll cast. You want to be able to get that thing in there, into cover, and from the bank. If you're the one person making these kinds of casts into cover like that, you're going to be the only person catching fish. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned some techniques that are really valuable when you're fishing from the bank, and hopefully it'll help you catch a lot more fish, because from the bank, we don't have a boat where we can go to a million places. With the places that we can cast to, we need to have a wide arsenal of casts. And once you get your pitch cast down, once you get your rolling cast down, once you get your skipping down, the possibilities of places that you can fish from the bank open up huge. So again, don't worry, it's not less manly to fish on a spinning reel. Start with a spinning reel, get used to it, because nothing is more demotivating than blowing up reel after reel after reel on a backlash while learning how to cast. Start with that spinning reel, get used to the motions, and then get after it. Right now, I'm going to start fishing because this place looks super fishy. So that's going to be another video, and hopefully it'll be coming up soon. And what are you guys doing here? Get out of here.